host, Patrick Darms.
And I'm your co-host, Anton Paras.
And joining us is a guest you've not heard for quite some time. Peter Baldeo, welcome back.
Thank you. Yes, it has been a long few months, but we're back.
Oh,
Yeah.
welcome back, Pete. How you doing?
I'm doing okay. We took a little hiatus because we had a baby, but she's sleeping now. Things are on the up and up, and we're doing okay. Just
big congratulations, of course.
Very much congratulations.
Glad to be back. So thank you guys for having me back here. Great movie too, I think.
Oh yeah, I will not hide my love for this film.
I'm with you, Pat. I think we're gonna have an agreement here.
I think this might be a gush fest from the three of us.
It's gonna be a real gush fest.
Yeah, and that's okay. We've done that before. We all had a gush fest for The Last Samurai.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah. Pete, have we had you on for a film that we all genuinely hated? I don't think so.
No. But we got to have some fun with You Only Live Twice.
Yeah, we loved You Only Live Twice. That was a lot of fun. Oh, Terminator 3 was pretty
Terminator, yeah. Rise of the Machines.
Yeah. What am I saying? Hannibal. That's an atrocity of a film.
Hannibal was great, only for the gore.
Sure.
So the stunt guys did a great job. We'll say that.
Yeah.
The movie was pretty terrible.
Ridley Scott.
Yeah, it was definitely a letdown.
Speaking of Ridley Scott, we were just talking about Gladiator 2 before the recording started, and how much we doubt that film is going to be good.
Yeah.
I would love to be proven wrong to see it in IMAX, but unfortunately, I just can't see it.
It's such a big deal to have a sequel to one of the greatest movies of all time. And I don't know, I still can't believe they've made this movie and that they're putting it out.
And it's years. The original was 2001, right?
2000.
So it's been years.
25 years.
25 years?
Almost 25 years, yeah. I was really expecting to hear that sweeping Hans Zimmer music in the trailer, and it's no, Kanye West.
You got no disrespect to Jay-Z. Jay-Z's also on that song.
True.
Oh, is it Jay-Z? I thought, was it both? Am I completely wrong?
It was both of them.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, it was both of them. It still doesn't change, why did you throw that song in there?
I was very confused. I was watching it, and I was are they rapping in Gladiator times? I was
Hans Zimmer score is super famous. It's one of the most famous film scores from that era, and it's you'd think they would use that.
Kanye West is also very famous for our era, if you think about it.
Right. Well, he was big in the Roman Empire.
He was. Right. He was.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we may end up covering that. Not looking forward to it. By the way, if you haven't seen it, Beverly Hills Cop Axel F, super entertaining.
Is it really?
I really enjoyed it. Yes, it's pretty funny. I really liked it.
So I think my Netflix algorithm, it just keeps spamming me with that, and a whole bunch of weird German shows that I'm probably into. But I usually trust their algorithm. It's pretty good.
Now, remind me, is it the fourth in the series? Is it the fifth in the series?
The fourth.
It's the fourth.
Yeah.
Oh, so it's a continuation of the original Beverly Hills Cops.
Oh yeah, it has the entire original cast in it.
Oh, that I didn't know. Okay,
yeah,
I thought it was
pretty
a spinoff.
Cool. No, it's. I was very pleasantly surprised by it. Yeah, because the third Beverly Hills Cop is one of the worst movies ever made.
Yes, I remember one of them wasn't bad. I think I saw the first two. I don't think I ever saw
the first one's a classic. The second one I think is pretty fun. The third one's awful, and then this one I had no expectations for it. I really liked it.
All right.
Among Beverly Hills movies, I much preferred Beverly Hills Ninja, but
oof, that's a tough take.
It's a good movie.
It's a hilarious movie.
I haven't seen
Not a good movie, but it's hilarious.
If you want something entertaining, check out Atlas.
That's why I love you, Anton. You're honest. You're it's not a good movie, but it's hilarious.
Yeah. Chris Farley.
What a legend.
Legend.
He was.
Yeah.
Gone too soon.
True.
Peter, the last time you were here, we covered a film from the early 70s, and we figured, why not continue that trend?
Honestly, when you texted me about this movie, I was pretty excited. Can I give my little intro now as to when I saw it, or no? Should I wait? I'm going to wait.
Give it 1 minute.
Okay.
So I'll intro this for us, and then real quick, and then we can get into it.
Mm-hmm.
But so this is the dramatic retelling of the Pearl Harbor attack, and it details everything in the days that led up to the tragic moment in American history. As United States and Japanese relations strain over the U.S. embargo of raw materials, Japan's Navy plans a preemptive strike against the United States. Although American intelligence agencies intercept Japanese communications hinting at the attack, they are unwilling to believe such a strike could ever occur on U.S. soil. Tora, Tora, Tora was released on September 23rd, 1970 by 20th Century Fox and the Toei Company. Directed by Richard Fleischer, Toshio Masuda, and Kinji Fukusaku. Fukasaku. Screenplay by Larry Forrester, Hideo Ugani, and Ryuzo Kikushima. Starring Martin Balsam, Joseph Cotton, So Yamamura, E.G. Marshall, James Whitmore, Tatsuya Mahashi, Takahiro Tamura, Wesley Addy, and Jason Robards. The budget was $25 million. Adjusted for inflation, that is a staggering $225 million. And the box office was only $37 million. Adjusted for inflation, that is $333 million. Peter, why were you excited when I texted you about Tora, Tora, Tora?
Okay, so I didn't learn that this was, I don't want to say a controversial movie, but growing up, I bounced around from schools to schools, and I distinctly remember I ended up in a school in 5th grade in Secaucus, New Jersey, a teacher named Mr. Grazioli. The dude was like a World War II buff. Shout out to anyone that's listening that knows this guy. He decided that as part of his like US history course, he wanted to show us this movie, and he had to jump through all of these hoops with the school board, and we all had to sign permission slips. And I remember seeing this movie. It was kind of like the first time in my life that I was like, holy crap, this actually happened in the world and this is wild. So it absolutely blew me away. And I didn't know until you asked me that like some people hated this movie. I thought this was just the best movie ever made and people loved it. I enjoyed it, but I think it represents something that was like personal to me, and it was like a big hurdle. I'm watching it in school and it was controversial. So it's something that I remember. This guy fought to show us this movie and then gave us a test on it.
Okay. What school did you go to? Because this movie's rated G.
I went to, it was a Secaucus Huber Street School was the name of it.
They're like, we don't show Pearl Harbor films here.
Well, I think it was more he needed to get permission from our parents because we were minors, even though it was rated G. Like you can't just show kids movies, I think.
Yeah, even
or
when
maybe
I
I was just a science project, which is kind of sad, but
I'm going to ask this one kid.
Like,
Oh, man.
because I'm the new kid, right? Like I'm the dude that just showed up.
My experience was a little different than yours, but I saw it as a kid as well. My grandparents had this on VHS, and I watched it a bunch of times. Like you, I just liked it. I had no idea that it wasn't well received when it came out, and it doesn't have a great Rotten Tomatoes score. I just always saw it as, yeah, this is like a I was a big World War II buff as a kid. I still am. This was, pretty much the only film about Pearl Harbor that I saw until Michael Bay's 2001 Misadventure. I actually saw that I actually saw this film before the Pearl Harbor film from 2001. And
Josh
this
Hartnett.
is really interesting for the podcast. I would say it's a classic war movie. I wouldn't call it a classic movie because I don't think the average moviegoer knows what this movie is. It fits the criteria for why wasn't it better so well because
it does.
This was one of the biggest movies ever made at the time. In fact, it was the second most expensive movie ever made at the time of its release. Second only to what, Anton?
Second only to
T3 Rise of the Machines.
No.
We've covered it, Anton.
Okay.
The Towering Inferno.
No, that was after this.
You only live twice.
And not nearly as expensive. No, Cleopatra.
Yeah.
Oh.
That was like a staggering, that was a $45 million budget in like 1963.
God, dude.
Yeah. It's just awful.
It's just nuts.
But yeah, I don't know how many times I saw this film as a kid. Quite a lot. I was really eager to revisit it. This is one of the films that was suggested to me by an older listener. And as soon as the suggestion came in, I was like, perfect.
Yep. 100%.
What about you, Anton?
So I have to actually chalk this one up to cable television, our good friends at Turner Classic Movies. And I remember seeing this one when I was in middle school. At the same time, I was also really into World War II and just World War II history. And seeing this film was just so exciting just because of, well, we're going to get into it, like how accurate a lot of the portrayal is and just how they depict it was just amazing to see on screen. And the time I remember even thinking, like, because I'd seen, as a kid, a lot of classic movies, and I remember seeing that and even thinking when I was younger, wow, like that is super well done. And so I'm excited for us to kind of dig in and see why. Thinking
about it now in a more critical lens, this film is a bit of a unicorn. I would say it is very much a product of its time, but it is almost one of a kind. It's a very unique film just from the two different sides that it portrayed. There's not a lot of war films from that era or really any era that are like this.
Agreed. Remember when we talked about on You Only Live Twice about how they portrayed like a world conflict?
Yes.
I thought that was really interesting of how they showed both sides and how they reacted to it, and how you see the emotions of both sides play out.
Yeah, and you get a even
Mhm.
more in-depth look here.
Yeah, and I think I don't want to spoil it because I'm going to save the point for till later. I don't want to go into any more detail. Sorry, listeners, that was a little out of place, but I'm going to save it for
Like,
later.
it's like we're not going to spoil what happened on December 7th, 1941, but
But in case you were wondering,
stay tuned as we discuss.
It involved Ben Affleck.
Josh Hartnett.
I can't remember the exact quote, but the Roger Ebert review of Pearl Harbor, it goes something along the lines of, this is a 2-hour movie crammed into a 3-hour movie, and it's about how on December 7th, 1941, the Japanese launched a surprise attack on an American love triangle. I think he gave it 1 star too. It's like,
That's kind of sad.
and of course, we won't keep the listeners in suspense. We are going to cover Pearl Harbor at some point because that for sure fits the criteria for this podcast. That was a very hyped movie in 2001. I remember being
Yeah.
really excited for that movie. I remember it having a great trailer.
Every commercial was a Pearl
Yeah,
Harbor
it was all
commercial
over. The
with Ben
marketing for
Affleck.
it was huge. And then when
Yeah.
everyone saw it, we were like, well, Pearl Harbor was in it, but not a lot.
Yeah. No, it was like they were in Hawaii, but
They were in Hawaii. But we're not here to talk about Pearl Harbor. We're here to talk about Tora. And the hype for this was significant in 1970. We mentioned the budget. They marketed the heck out of this. They were really hoping this would be something like The Longest Day, which came out in the early 1960s, which was a very successful movie, but a very different movie at the same time. That may be a movie we cover eventually as well, Anton, because that's a fun one.
Mhm.
But for now, let's go to the production history because this is going to be quite a bit. There's a lot here. This film was years in the making. The executive at Fox named Daryl Zanuck, he had actually earlier produced The Longest Day in 1962. He wanted to create an epic that depicted, quote, what really happened on December 7th, 1941 with a revisionist approach, end quote. He believed that the commanders in Hawaii, General Short and Admiral Kimmel, had been scapegoated for the attack. Wanting to tell a balanced story of the events, Zanuck proposed an American-Japanese co-production allowing for, quote, a point of view from both nations, end quote. Now, his son Richard helped him develop the project. Richard Zanuck is someone that we have mentioned before on this podcast. He produced a lot of successful films, including Jaws and the Planet of the Apes series, and he was instrumental in launching the career of young Steven Spielberg. So pretty cool. Zanuck spent 3 years developing this film. His idea was groundbreaking for the time. It involved 2 entirely separate productions, one based in the United States, the other in Japan. The Japanese side was initially going to be directed by Akira Kurosawa, who
Legend.
worked on script development and pre-production for 2 years. Anton, just take a minute and tell us how much you like Kurosawa.
Akira Kurosawa is a legend, and that is a bit of an understatement. Of course, we have some of his greatest films, Ran, of course, Ikuru, and I feel like it's one of the probably kind of closest comparisons is like the early works of Francis Ford Coppola is even compared to Kurosawa. Kurosawa's up there with the greats, absolutely in my Mount Rushmore of greatest directors of all time.
Definitely. You got to wonder what this would have been if he had directed the Japanese part.
Well, he did go out and say during like a press announcement during the pre-development, since he was involved, that this was going to be the most important work of his career. So he really, really was invested in the process.
This is such a fascinating what if. So the screenplay was written by a frequent Kurosawa collaborator, 2 gentlemen, Hideo Ogani and Ryuzo Kikushima. They based their screenplay on books by Ladislav Faragao and Gordon Prang of the University of Maryland, who served as a technical consultant. Now, legendary editor Elmo Williams, who had moved into a producer's role, he was also heavily involved in the production. Like Zanuck, he was obsessed with maintaining as much historical accuracy as possible. The film employed dozens of technical advisors on both sides, some of who had participated in the battle itself and the planning of the battle itself, which is really cool. Minoru Genda, the man who largely planned and led the attack on Pearl Harbor, he was an uncredited technical advisor for the film. So they really placed a high premium on accuracy for this. And it really is great to watch it later. And this is probably one of, if not the most historically accurate World War II films of all time.
And also just kind of I think like a testament to diplomacy and ease tensions at the time that both Japanese and American groups are able to come together to create the film over what was like a major conflict between our countries.
Yeah, and if you think about it, what, only 30 or 40 years after that conflict?
25.
Yeah,
Not
very
even.
recent.
Yeah.
And it ended drastically. So, Pat, to your point about historical accuracy, I remember the first thing they ran on the film, and I wrote this down. The first thing of the movie is I've never seen this written in a movie that's just true to historical fact at the beginning of the movie. It's usually like based on a true story, or it
Yeah.
kind of has the character, but I've never seen that in a movie, and I wrote that down.
Yeah, it's a good call out. Yeah, you're right. You don't see that much at all,
Yeah,
if at all.
I've never seen true to historical fact, and I like to think I've watched a lot of good and bad movies. Never once seen it, and I wrote it down. And then during the pre stuff, which I don't think the audience hears, I think you confirmed as to why. Me as an outsider looking in, I asked a ridiculous question. You were like, "Oh, this is why they do that." I think it makes perfect sense.
Not a ridiculous question. So, regarding Kurosawa's involvement, the films of Akira Kurosawa by Donald Ritchie and Joan Mellon, is a great source on this. I'm a little surprised he agreed to work on this film at all, given that he is he was an auteur, and this is very much a studio production. But then you figure out why. Anton, you kind of already stated it. It's just he felt it was so important. It's kind of a shame what happened. Fox kind of deceived him by telling him that David Lean was going to be working on the American scenes, which was a complete lie. They tried to talk to Lean, but that never really got anywhere. That would have been, talk about a big deal.
Huge.
I mean, Lean was the Spielberg, Christopher Nolan of his day. He would have been coming off Lawrence of Arabia and Dr. Zhivago. This would have been his next film if he had worked on this.
So this film would have been 6 hours.
Yes.
6 parts. It would have been like the Justice League.
Yes.
They had to release a
You would
director's
have gotten
cut.
the Lean cut and the Kurosawa cut. Lean was in discussions with the studio at one point, but he never fully committed to it. Now, Fox executives, they did not approve of Kurosawa's shooting schedule, and they even went so far as to rewrite his script for the Japanese scenes. His original script for this part of the film ran, no surprise, 4 hours, and the studio wanted to be closer to 90 minutes. So Richard Fleischer ended up being hired to direct the American sequences. Fleischer was no amateur. He was a highly respected veteran who had directed big budget productions like 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and Fantastic Voyage. And most importantly, he was known for finishing productions on time and on budget. And by the way, Richard Fleischer lived long enough to give a director's commentary on the Blu-ray. Pretty insightful. Things became complicated when Kurosawa saw Fleischer's Fantastic Voyage, and he hated it. When they met each other in Hawaii, he was alarmed by how much ketchup the American director poured on his food, and from then on, he referred to Fleischer as the Ketchup Man. The studio was annoyed to learn that Kurosawa was using Japanese investors as extras in scenes as part of a quid pro quo for their funding of the Japanese half of the production. After 2 weeks of shooting, Kurosawa was fired and replaced by Toshio Masuda and Kinji Fukasaku. It's a shame because he really did put in about 2 years of pre-production work on this, and it was all for nothing. His name does not appear in the credits, and none of the footage that he shot was actually used in the final cut. This is what Fleischer has to say about it. Quote, I always thought that even though Kurosawa was a genius at filmmaking, and indeed he was, I sincerely believe he was miscast for this film. This was not his type of film to make. He never made anything like it, and it just wasn't his style. I felt he was not only uncomfortable directing this kind of movie, but he also wasn't used to having someone tell him how he should make this film. He always had complete autonomy, and nobody would dare make a suggestion to Kurosawa about the budget or shooting schedule or anything like that. And here he was, with Daryl Zanuck on his back and Richard Zanuck on him and Elmo Williams and the production managers, and it was all stuff that he had never run into before because he was always untouchable. I think he was getting more and more nervous and more insecure about how he was going to work on this film. And of course, the press got a hold of all this unrest on the set, and they made a lot of that in Japan, and it was more pressure on him, and he wasn't used to that kind of pressure, end quote.
Really harsh.
But understandable
It
in
is.
a way.
He's right though, because if an artist comes into a business where he has financial expectations, I think there's some clout to that.
When Kurosawa was fired, he was more than 3 weeks behind schedule. Now, to solve this, 2 separate productions were split for the remaining work. Toshio Masuda handled the dramatic scenes. He directed about 25 features in a decade, so he had a lot of experience doing that. And then Kinji Fukasaku had experience directing action and scenes involving special effects, so he handled those scenes.
Yeah, both of those guys, those are not also like, those are pretty big names respectively.
Yeah, I don't want to undersell them.
Yeah, Toshio Masuda basically like kicked off the golden age of anime with Space Battleship Yamato. Kinji Fukasaku, he directed a film so influential that it created a video game phenomenon today called Battle Royale. Yeah, so both of those, again, directors, so influential in their own right and for what they've directed. And you can actually see a lot of their styles, as even you just said, Pat, in the film during the Japanese portions. And just one more little fun tidbit. We know the film, or we know that the American studio partnered with Toei. Do either of you know one of the major anime, one of the greatest all-time anime that Toei Animation is known for having produced?
Dragon Ball Z.
Of course.
Let's go.
There's got to be more than that, right?
There's
There's so much more, dude. There's so much more.
There's so many more.
I was like, come on, man.
It's just so funny. Like this film, film is like what, like maybe like 2 degrees away from Goku.
It's closer than Kevin Bacon, I guess, if you think about it, right?
It is closer than Kevin Bacon.
It's closer.
Toshiro Mifune was going to play Yamamoto, but withdrew when Kurosawa was fired. Fox commissioned artist Robert McCall to create 25 concept paintings, all of which you can find online, and they're pretty spectacular. Now, 4 cinematographers were employed, all of whom were jointly nominated for Best Cinematography at the Academy Awards. The Japanese airplanes flown in the movie were all converted American trainers. No genuine Japanese warbirds could be found in flying condition at the time. Several American planes had to be rebuilt at a cost of about $30,000 each. They were later sold at auction for about $1,500 each, and most are still flying in private hands. The 2001 film Pearl Harbor would use some of the same modified aircrafts. When filming finally began, it was plagued with problems from the start. Storms destroyed expensive exteriors, closing down production while they were rebuilt. The USS Yorktown was disguised as the Japanese carrier Kaga to film scenes of aircrafts taking off and landing. It was fitted with a false bow to disguise the catapults. Yeah, they were really filming planes taking off from real aircraft carriers. So let that sink in. The carrier entering Pearl Harbor towards the end of the film was in fact the Essex-class aircraft carrier USS Kearsarge, returning to port. Giant model ships, some of them 40 feet long, were shot in giant tanks at the Fox Ranch in Calabasas, California, using high-speed cameras to give the vessels realistic movement. A full-size replica of the stern of the battleship Arizona was built atop 3 barges at a cost of $1.5 million. A.D. Flowers and L.B. Abbott both supervised the special effects and would win an Oscar. They also did work on the Poseidon Adventure and the Towering Inferno. Please go back and listen to those episodes if you haven't, listeners. For the parallel filming in Japan, full-scale mock-ups of the Japanese battleship Nagato and aircraft carrier Akagi were built from the waterline up on shore, with about 90 feet or 27 meters of their bows extending out over the ocean on stilts. They were used for much of the Japanese scenes on ships' decks. Now, Jason Robards was not only in the service, but serving at Pearl Harbor when the attack took place. He was the only main actor to film in Hawaii. Even though a premiere was years away, the studio began promoting the film as, quote, the most incredible movie ever made, end quote. The filming began all the way back in December 1968 and lasted more than 8 months, until June 1969. Post-production took a very long time, as the film was not released for another 15 months. After going 150% over its budget, the final cost was over $25 million, making it the second most expensive movie ever made at the time. When it finally came out, it underperformed in North America, and critics didn't like it. Roger Ebert gave the film 1 star, calling it, quote, one of the deadest, dullest blockbusters ever made, end quote. Really, Roger? Really?
Shocking.
It's harsh.
Yeah, harsh.
Now, it has a 55% Rotten Tomato score, with an audience score much higher at 81%. It's also worth putting out, this was a smash hit in Japan, and that is a production on Tora Tora Tora.
Before we talk about why wasn't it better, let's take a brief break as we hear from a sponsor. Today's podcast is brought to you by Sprizzy. Looking to skyrocket your YouTube channel's growth? Meet Sprizzy, your video's ultimate matchmaker. Their tailored ad campaigns connect your content with viewers who are already looking for videos like yours. With Sprizzy, you're not just getting views, you're gaining subscribers who are genuinely interested in what you create. Are you ready to boost your reach? Visit Sprizzy.com today and let's launch your channel to new heights. Sprizzy, the smarter way to promote your YouTube channel. Now that we're back, let's get into the discussion reasons. Number one, the Vietnam piece. This is a big one. Apart from the counterculture film like MASH, war films
Mhm.
were, I would say, in a bit of a nadir at the time of this film's release. It's easy to understand why. America was sick of war. We
Mhm.
were in the midst of scaling back from Vietnam. This film's failure in North America was partially blamed on opposition to the Vietnam War, and which is completely understandable, right? I have young moviegoers weren't interested in a movie about World War II. I don't think any moviegoers were at the time.
Yeah, no, it's pretty easy to see. I mean, even when you look at the trends of the time of like what kind of films were popular, a lot of it was much more grounded in the reality of the times, whether it was blaxploitation or even a lot of films about like the kung fu craze at the time.
I know the film Patton came out the same year and did pretty well, which is a World War II movie, sort of, but that's more of
Mhm.
a biopic, would you say?
Yeah, and very, I think very different depictions of violence as well that people would see on screen.
Yeah. The next reason why this wasn't better, the main criticism of this film is that it's boring. This is something that you will read a lot if you look up the reviews of this film. They're very critical of the slow pace. One review says, quote, "This movie is strictly for history buffs only, though, because it presents the story in the most dry way possible. So know that going in. It's like a History Channel reenactment with all the right aircraft carriers and airplanes," end quote. I actually think that's partly fair.
Yeah, I agree. I literally wrote down, I like documentaries and used to watch them all the time, so it has a special place for me, but it reminds me of there was a series on History Channel called The Men Who Built America.
Yeah, I know that one. I love it.
And so do I, right? And
Yeah.
I think it was funny when I was reading this, I was like, oh, that's probably why they love the movie. But it was like, it's a dramatization of a history event that's historically accurate, and I think I see it. I see why people hate
Yeah.
it,
It's
but I
fair.
also I understand why I love it.
I
This is
think,
one of those movies where this is the opposite of a four-quadrant movie.
mm,
If you're
Yeah.
not interested in World War II, I
Mm-mm.
highly doubt you would enjoy this film.
No, no way.
There's no love
There's,
story.
there's
There's no
nothing.
main character. There's no
Nope.
real character development of any kind. There's no
No.
melodrama of any kind. There's really nothing. It's a docudrama.
Whoa, 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 whoa. Don't you dare be reductive to Mr. Brooks Hatlin, who escaped from prison only to be placed on a U.S. naval carrier. I'm just kidding.
James Whitmore?
Yeah.
Oh, he's so good in this movie.
His name's Brooks Hatlin,
I
please.
know. I know. I'm so glad he's. How delighted were you to see him pop up in this?
Saw his face again, and now that I'm older, I was like, you're the man, Brooks.
He gets some good lines in this too.
He does. He
What
does.
does he say that one line? He's like, "The Atlantic's a swimming hole compared to the Pacific."
The other thing I have to say, and I think this always has to be noted, and I think I said this about You Only Live Twice, is these guys and gals are acting in the 1970s, right? On these sets, and there's times where you see them on a set, and I'm using quotations here, that is a U.S. naval carrier, and they're acting, and they're selling it. They're selling it the best they can. I think they deserve some praise for that because I'm not an actor by any means, but I believe it would be harder in the 1970s than it would be now with all of the special effects and the green screen we have,
I mean,
right?
we saw the opposite end of the spectrum with Pearl Harbor, the Michael Bay movie. I mean, we saw
Oh,
what that was.
we were just waiting for Transformers to pop
Yeah.
out. There were explosions though, right?
There were plenty of explosions.
That is what Michael Bay does well, and he did deliver.
He did
And then
delivered that part of it.
wasn't there like a like I forget who the girl was, but the girl loved one of the pilots, then the pilot died, and
Kate
then she had
Beckinsale.
was he
Yeah, she
the,
thinks Ben Affleck died, and he
and she had like
didn't.
another relationship. Anyway, this is
Yeah, with
about
his
Tora,
best
Tora,
friend.
Tora.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah,
terrible
Kate,
movie.
yeah, it's Kate
It's,
Beckinsale.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's not ideal.
It's awful. None of that crap in here.
Okay,
Mm-mm.
fair. Back to
No, they
historical
don't give you
accuracy.
any of that crap in here. This is a very slow, methodical, procedural type of movie. I don't mind the pacing at all. I don't find this movie boring at all. But again, I admit partly it's because I'm so into history and I'm very familiar with the events that led up to Pearl Harbor, and I think it's fascinating to see them play out. It's a
Yeah.
lot of meetings and rooms, but if you're interested in the context of it, this is a great movie to see it.
Yeah, I was a political science major in college, and the thing I wrote down was it was really cool watching the gamesmanship behind planning this attack. Right, you were going to attack a world power, and you were like, no, 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 we're gonna do it. We're gonna do it method A. And then they were like, no, 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 we're not even gonna drop the missiles. We're gonna use the planes as missiles. To watch that, for me, that was really cool. I used to play a lot of strategy games and stuff growing up, but like the thing I think about is in the context of today. that type of warfare and communicating and intercepting telegrams and stuff, we live in such a faster world today,
Yeah.
right? And there's some clout that, albeit an absolutely horrendous act, and it dragged us into World War II, and I get that. You have to give some credit for the fact that they were able to think of this and negotiate this and kind of figure this out without iPhones. And then, if I'm not mistaken, I think the captain was like tripping balls at one point when he was explaining the attack, and they found him in that one room. I'm not really sure
Oh,
what
the
was going.
what do they call him? Not Yoda, because Yoda. This is obviously way before Yoda. They give him some nickname. He's like a hermit.
Yeah, and he's
Mhm.
just like in this room, and he's like huddled over, like the Force is like taking
Yeah,
over. He looks like
yeah.
Darth Insidious from, and then he's like, "We're gonna use the planes." And I was like, I feel, because it's true to historical fact, I'm not gonna question it, but I feel like there's a little more
Yeah,
to
they were
them
having a little
figuring this
fun
out.
with it, I think.
Right. I get it. I acknowledge it. I enjoy it. I understand why people hate it, but I think it was really cool to be able to see that and see the figures. I love when they would show the actor with their title, Captain
Very
James
helpful.
Yamamoto.
Yes.
Yeah,
The
Yeah,
title
super
card.
loved
helpful.
Yeah,
it.
very helpful.
Loved it. Loved it.
Yeah,
So
I need I need to play devil's advocate a little bit in terms of there really is a strong personal bias for why I found so many of the conversation and depictions so fascinating. It's because I want to know, like, or because like I love to see it, and because I know the depth and like the weight of the situation that
yeah,
it just feels that much more fascinating. I think your average movie goer probably doesn't feel that same appreciation.
No.
Kinds of films where you have people just having conversations, that's like objectively, like I think like the first 20 minutes of this film is a lot of just people in rooms having conversations, which
yes,
we know the weight of those conversations are so important. But for example, if I'm trying to think about it in terms of like pacing objectively for like today's audience, scenes like the Japanese ambassador and going into like that chess game of going into conversations with the US ambassadors, did that really have to be in the film? Does it really move the plot forward? But it is like kind of a crucial component of understanding like, Pearl Harbor as a whole.
I
So
think all of the criticism about the pacing and I think is totally fair for the reasons we just discussed. I think that is necessary to be in the film because you have to set up the Japanese ambassador later when they're trying to translate the messages because that was a huge key to the Pearl Harbor thing. The fact that they weren't
Mhm.
able to get the declaration of war in on time and
yes,
they messed it up. So if you just see that pop in later when they're like when that one guy's typing as slow as humanly possible, you're
Mhm.
going to be like, wait, who are these people? Like, what's going on? What's going like? They have to
Yeah.
build that part of it up. I think that's a really important component of this because this
yeah,
this film is telling you in detail the how and the why of the events that led up to this attack.
Yeah,
right,
and I don't think that I'm not saying that we need to take out the film of the ambassador scenes entirely. It's just very dialogue heavy,
yeah,
very like again, we are seeing both sides of the ambassador speaking to other Japanese delegates and then seeing him speak with the US. There's a lot of detail in there in those conversations, very
Yeah.
intimate
yeah.
details. So I
And I
feel
feel
like
like,
can it
I'm sorry.
be lightened a little bit?
It's hard. Do I think the movie could have been shorter? Yes. But I think to your point, Anton, there's two different peoples. There's people that go to see a movie and there's people that go to see a film. And I think we see it as a film and we see the information as, wow, this is fantastic. Right? But at the end of the day, a movie does have to entertain you. And I understand that. This is more of a film that informs you as opposed to entertains you. And then everything just lets loose in the last 35 minutes of the movie, which is
Yeah.
awesome.
Because then it's entertaining.
Yes, exactly. Then it goes to entertaining. And I think it almost feels like they wanted to be so historic. It almost feels like it wanted to be more of a documentary than a movie.
I think I know what I would cut if I was given the choice. I would cut out some of the American military individuals because
Yeah.
Mhm.
as
We don't
many
need
times
that.
as I've seen this movie, there's still a couple scenes where I'm like, which admiral is that? Like,
There's a lot, yeah.
yeah.
And it almost feels like they want to put a spotlight on the person that made the decision to move the planes. Does that make sense?
Oh, General Short?
Yeah. I didn't want to throw him under the bus, but
Well, he
it
got thrown under the bus.
I know,
Mhm.
I know.
He was
And
relieved of his command after this.
I know. And it almost feels like it was like a burn film, right? Like, screw this guy, we're done with this guy. Like, we're just gonna burn him. And I understand why they did that because a lot of the decisions he made were pretty poor. Like, you would get wiped out if you were playing Age of Empires and you made those decisions.
Mhm.
Yeah, again, all this stuff is completely fair. That's precisely why I like it, though. I just found all the stuff interesting.
Yeah, I was actually, when you first hit me with why wasn't it better, I was like, man, I actually really like this movie, and I was excited to kind of defend it.
Well, all of us are liking it, but we
Yeah.
can acknowledge like to say that this stuff is boring to people. Like I am not going to argue that. Like it is fair.
It's
know.
not for everyone.
It's not. Does that make us losers?
No, I think it just makes
No,
us
of course not.
appreciative art.
All right, I think that's
No.
fair.
It's
I
a
guess
ton
that's
of exposition. That's what it is.
Well,
Yeah.
it
It's
kind of, if
like a US
even just
history
thinking
class.
of like a modern example like Oppenheimer, there was a lot of conversation in that film. There's a
Yeah.
lot of scene, like very similarly, you're just getting dramatizations of just people having conversations in rooms. Josh Hartnett, there's that Pearl Harbor connection.
Yeah.
But at the same time, when I talk to a lot of people about that film, very similarly, it's like there's just so much dialogue, and
Yeah.
it,
And
those kinds of films aren't
I
for
understand
everyone.
that.
It's the
Yeah.
kind of film you have to see it a couple times.
Correct.
Because once you
Right.
know who all the characters are in this, it's a
Mhm.
lot easier to while you're like, oh, Commander Kramer, it's Colonel Bratton. They run the
Yes.
coding machine room or whatnot.
That's Rami Malek.
Still don't
From
know who he
Mr.
is, but
From Mr. Robot.
yeah, still don't know who his character is in Oppenheimer, but whatever. I had to use Wikipedia.
He's obviously the guy from the James Bond movie in
Oh,
the
Mr.
past.
Oh, Mr. Bonds. Yes. Oh, God.
Hello, Mr. Bond.
Still don't know who he is in the Bond movie either.
That's all right. He's the guy from Oppenheimer.
Yeah, I would say though the film does do a good job of building the tension. Like I was timing this right around the hour mark is where the tension actually starts. Now I understand an hour into the film where the tension starts. That's asking a lot,
It is. It is.
but that's when it starts to cross cut between the Japanese task force approaching Hawaii and Commander Kramer is trying his best to bounce the decoded messages around. I thought that's when the movie really takes off.
Yeah. It started to pick up a little bit. And it's like, it almost felt like they were just telling two stories. It was like Crash in a way. Crash was a way where 18 different storylines were written together. They were telling these two different stories, and you almost felt like you're watching two different movies. And then as soon as they begin to come together, you're like, okay, I see what they're doing. I enjoyed it. I did. I enjoyed the fact that they did that. And I agree with you, Pat. It is a lot to ask for an hour. It is. But
You have to set all that up
Yeah,
you do. And
because it all pays off later.
And here's the criticism I'll ask. Is it a lot to ask in today's age? And what I mean by that is if we're used to getting the Marvel movies with explosions right in the seconds, is it a lot to ask in the 70s of this movie when I think everything's moving a little slower? I think if you contextually look at it, the answer is no. But if you extrapolate it and look at it from us in 2024, definitely I think it's hard to ask because it does feel slower.
Oh, for
Does that
sure.
does that make any sense? Or did I completely
No,
lose
it
you?
makes sense. I think there's a lot of reasons why the film takes off around the hour mark. You get that tension. I also noticed the score really starts to kick in
Yeah,
and
there's
become more
music.
prominent. It's a really good Jerry Goldsmith score.
You feel it. You feel
Yeah.
it after that. And there was an intermission. So shout out to the intermission. You don't
Yeah.
see that quite often.
Yeah,
Anton, how excited were you, Anton, when you saw Goldsmith's name pop up? You're like, yes.
let's go.
Yes.
I mean, and like you said, with an hour in, if you are invested, if you've been paying attention, you're really starting to get the payoff,
Yeah,
and
you are.
you do feel the tension.
You
Which
really
is just,
feel for Kramer.
yes,
Yeah.
I was really focusing on him because I noticed he is the only character that gets any kind of a quote unquote personal life shown on screen. I don't know why they picked him, but you get the brief stuff with him and his wife in the car.
In the
They
car,
don't do
right?
that with any other character.
Yeah, I noticed it. It just kind of felt a little out of place.
I agree with you because I was trying to figure out, I'm like, why him? Like, why do they give him the family life?
yeah.
It
I mean,
was-
I don't know
it was
why
odd.
him, but of course it makes sense. Like of what's occurring, let's ground this in reality for the audience.
But once you're in his shoes, I think it's really cool because he knows something's wrong. He can't figure it out. He's
Mhm.
trying to bounce the messages around, and they keep getting hung up because they're like, well, we have 13 of the 14 messages. And you're like, and you can see that he's like, damn it. Like we got to try to do something, but you can tell why he can't convince anyone. Like when Admiral Stark almost calls Hawaii, remember he has his like hand on the phone.
Mm-hmm.
He's about to call General Kimmel and warn him.
Think
And
he'll
he's
do
like,
it.
no, I got to talk to the president first.
Yeah,
You're
I'm
like,
not
oh,
gonna
man,
do it.
like,
That was
come
so
on.
annoying.
Like,
That
And-
could have been it right
And
there.
true.
That
Yeah.
And again,
could
it's
be
all
pivotal
true.
moment right in that movie.
yeah. Who knows? Would it have saved lives? Maybe a few. The planes were already in the air at that point, so the attack was going to happen no matter what.
Yeah, it was coming.
That is mostly pretty historically accurate. Stark was later like heavily criticized for his lack of his indecision really in handling this.
I mean, I get it, right? And I know we tell people that they need to make these decisions, but when the weight of your world is on your shoulder, I can't blame that guy for hesitating.
No.
Can you?
Well,
It's
that's the thing. We're
happened
going to
so
talk about
hard.
it a little bit more, but I think one of the reasons why I don't mind the runtime and the pacing is they do a good job, I think, of setting up how complicated the American bureaucracy is.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because it really was a failure of the bureaucracy.
Yeah.
You had
And
little
plus-
pieces all over the place. None of them put them together until it was too late.
Yeah, and the forced like
Plans were here.
communication through chain of command.
They send them a telegram at one point because the phone lines were out.
Nuts.
Yeah, that was crazy.
Telegram. It was a journey to
Yeah.
watch our country struggle
Yeah.
through basic communication. But hey, communication's what implodes empire. So
That and
like-
just not only just poor communication, so poor communication, chain of command, I think complacency, right?
Oh, yeah.
fair.
Yeah.
Totally fair.
Well, it was irrational for Japan to attack the United States, and they just never assumed that the Japanese would do anything that irrational. Like, they won't attack. Like, why would they attack us?
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. But all the warning signs were, of course, there. Okay, next reason why this wasn't better, because this is some of the other criticism I have heard about this movie, is that there is no main character. This is an ensemble piece in the truest sense of the word. Dozens of characters to follow. Obviously, some are more important than others. The most important ones get title cards. It's not something I have a problem with, just because like that's what this movie is. It's a procedural. It's giving you all the players. I don't mind it for the simple fact that there's no overacting. There are no stars to distract you. It's a group of well-known character actors. There are certainly many faces that you recognize, but there's no single superstar who overpowers anything. I'll give you a Longest Day reference, Anton. There's no John Wayne being John Wayne.
Nope.
John Wayne would have
Pilgrim.
been really out of place in this film.
Very. When I think of traditional like story writing, film writing, there's going to be, the hero's journey. That's a, pretty typical structure. And you don't really get that here because it's just kind of using the true story of what occurred at the time. And like you said, Pat, I think procedural is the best way to describe this film. But with that, it is a very specific and brave decision to follow through with that and not try to kind of put a bit more traditional Hollywood spin, like, I don't know, putting a love triangle or some sort of romance angle into the story, because that would bog down the story even more. So having it the way it is really is truer to the sense of being able to tell the story accurately.
There's no camp in this film whatsoever. There's a couple of, I would say, peppery characters that get some good lines, but one of the reasons why I think this film holds up really well, there's no cornball stuff in here whatsoever.
No, it's straight shooter, good information.
It's just, they're all playing it straight.
I think Anton.
Who would you say the biggest personality is in this film? Halsey?
Brooks Hatlin.
Yeah, right? I guess he's not even overacting, but I would say he's doing like quote unquote the loudest acting maybe, but I didn't even feel that it was out of place, because if you know anything about the real historical figure, Admiral Halsey, he was that kind of personality.
Yeah, I think Anton, to your point, it tells the story of an event, doesn't tell the story of a person acting another story. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Like,
it's not someone's
event is
story during
bigger-
Pearl Harbor. It's
Yes.
about Pearl Harbor.
The actual event of Pearl Harbor, and I think it does an homage to it, right? Because this is probably one of the darkest days in United States history, right? And I think it should be about the event. It shouldn't be about any one person in that event, because
So it
that
shouldn't
event
be
did
about
happen
Ben
and that
Affleck.
event was horrible.
You know, now that I think about it, they probably shouldn't have called this Tora. It probably would have did better if they had just called it Pearl Harbor.
It wouldn't surprise me, because I feel like from Tora, like, and I'll use my wife as kind of a gauge, right? Clueless when it comes to movies. I said Tora, and she had no idea what the hell I was talking about. But I was like,
Right.
oh, it's a Pearl Harbor movie, and she was like, oh, I know Pearl Harbor.
You're like, no, not that one. No.
She was literally like, what are you talking about? I was like, the movie about World War II. She's like, nope. It's like, okay.
Nope. Well, everything that we're just talking about with the characters, that was a deliberate decision on the studio's part. They decided to heavily rely on character actors, so the focus would be on the story.
I think it's a smart move. I think it worked out well for them.
If I had to pick a character that I thought had the most arc, it would be Admiral Yamamoto.
Yeah. Certainly the most interesting
yeah.
character.
Yeah, I could see that. You see a
Because it
range of
was-
emotions from him.
because you see in the beginning, it's setting forth, getting the troops ready, fully, invested in the attack,
Doesn't want
and
to do
then
it though.
doesn't want to do it, but following orders. And of course, like knowing at the end, we know he knows the repercussions.
Yeah, and I think the way they ended the movie was perfect because I think it plays to your exact point, Anton, where he's like, I kind of told you so, man. Told you this wasn't going to go well.
I think that's the best scene in the film when his
Yeah.
entire staff are celebrating and he's just sitting there.
Yeah, I loved it. I thought it was so well done. I really did. I was like, I mean, that gets the message across, man. It's like a mic drop, right?
Another good move on their part. While they are mentioned several times, Emperor Hirohito and President Roosevelt are not in the film.
Notice that.
I think that was a wise decision on their part. There
Yeah,
was enough
smart.
characters in the film already.
Mhm.
They didn't. It would have overpowered the film in such a way. You get enough of the cabinet, right? We get the Secretary of State, the Secretary
Yeah.
of War, the Chief of Naval Operations, all the commanders. That's enough.
Yeah, and I think, Anton, to that point, if you add Hirohito and Roosevelt in, you make it about the person and not the event.
That's true, because
Make
they
it about
could have clearly
what
been seen as like much more major characters.
correct. Because
Yeah.
what were those people? What decision? What information did they have, and what decisions were they making, and how did that play out? As opposed to these are two. I mean, let's call them. I don't want to say nameless and faceless, but two world powers that are viewed as countries that are warring together, and one has made a decision to launch a secret attack.
The Hirohito thing is really interesting, right? Because there's still to this day, there's a lot of debate over how much decision-making power did he actually have in World War II. Because obviously he kept his throne after the war was over. The rest of the Japanese leaders certainly did not. Most of them were hung for war crimes. Like you see Tojo briefly in this
Yeah.
film, and what's the character's name? The prince. I think he was the prime minister at this point. What is his?
Oh,
I can't think of the real individual's name offhand. You know who I'm talking about. He was basically the prime minister of Japan. He, of course, he committed suicide after the war was over. He would have been tried.
seppuku.
I think he did, yeah.
Yeah.
But, Hirohito's involvement, it's not entirely clear how much he knew what was going on or how much he was just letting Tojo and the others run things.
Yeah,
So I
it
think that's
was.
probably another reason why they didn't include him here.
I was gonna say it was
Hmm.
pretty heavily debated, right? This was a military-run government at the time,
Yeah,
Yeah.
pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and then
So it
the emperor in that seat was literally just a figurehead.
right.
Yeah.
Familiar faces. Let's run through the cast a little bit. Jason Robards is General Short. He's really good. Martin Balsam is Admiral Kimmel. I
Mhm.
guess they're the most famous actors in the film. Jason Robards is obviously a 2-time Oscar winner. Both of them are great. I think my favorite characters are probably Bratton and Kramer on the American side. Just,
Likeable.
likable. You can tell they're just trying to work through it, trying to work through the bureaucracy. Bratton is played by E.G. Marshall. He is best known for playing juror number 4 in 12 Angry Men, and he plays the president in Superman 2.
Good to know. What a classic.
Yeah, he's been around a long time. Well, we talked about Kramer, right? Played by Wesley Addy. I like the scenes with his wife in the car. That's good
Yeah.
stuff. You mentioned James Whitmore as Admiral Halsey. It's pretty awesome.
Brooks Hatlin.
I like when Kimmel tells him, use your common sense. He's like, that's the best damn order I ever had.
So patriotic. I love it.
Yeah. But let's talk about Yamamoto a bit. This actor is So Yamamura. I definitely recognized him. Anton, you were getting into it before. He is definitely the most interesting character in the film. Fascinating historical figure to read about. And I think this actor, Yamamura, does him justice. I think his acting's great.
Yeah, he was another film that's absolute classic that he was in. It was the film Tokyo Story. Watch that film.
That's it. Yep, that's it.
And it's a classic. And it's one of those just great examples of almost slice of life and just like looking at the generational differences between different generations of the Japanese and economic changes over time. But that's a classic film, and in this particular film, So Yamamura did an amazing job.
The actor who plays Nagumo, his name is Ijoro Tono.
Mhm.
I think he's another standout. Sort
Yeah.
of like Yamamoto, you can really sense his frustration with this. He seems to share Yamamoto's view that like this attack is really not a good idea.
This doesn't seem to be good.
Yeah, but he goes through with it. He is the task force commander. I just really like his scenes. He's pretty stoic. When they try to give him crap for not launching a third wave, he's just like, no, we don't really know where the American carriers are. We've done our job. We need to get out of here. And it's like, yeah, that makes sense.
You should probably do that
Yeah.
now.
Yeah, I'm trying to
Yeah.
think, like, we kind of touched on this earlier of the importance of two, a Japanese studio and American studio coming together to make this film. And it's a lot of respect, I'd say, on both sides, but especially on the American side to have the Japanese portion depicted fully in Japanese and then with the subtitles in the film. Not a ton of films like that, right? Especially like a joint
No,
venture like
no.
this.
That was
And
really
so
cool.
I think like
I
the
actually enjoyed
accuracy
that.
of that, like again, something that should not be understated.
Yeah, and I think too. I think this statement would only fly to a certain number of people, probably the three people here. Remember when Nelly released those two albums, Sweat and Suit? I feel
Yes,
like
I
they
do.
could have. I feel like they could
Where
have.
are you going with this?
I feel like they could have released the movie in two parts. Obviously, it would have failed if they released it mass market, but like the three people here would have been like, "This is actually super cool that they did this in two parts." I thought that could like I remember watching the movie and I was like, man, they could have gotten away with this, but I was like, there's like one person on the planet that would watch that, and that would be
Well,
me.
I have a little bit more relevant example for you. Clint Eastwood
Okay.
did exactly this.
He did this with what is it? The Iwo Jima
Letters from
Letters
Iwo
from
Jima,
Iwo
which is
Yeah.
the Japanese side of is it?
I feel like we're
And
being
Flags
trolled.
of Our Fathers was the other part of it.
Yeah.
It's a separate film. But I do like the sweatsuit example.
Right? I tried. I looked for something historically.
Look, you set me up for that, so that's good.
Yeah.
Let's get into
Coming-
the next reason then, which is the Japanese side, right? It seems like there was criticism about this at the time, but this is the best thing about the film.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it
Easily.
shows it shows that like there are real no black and whites to like
No.
the story.
Yeah.
Like it really is just perspectives of each side. To say it's sympathetic is just to say that we're not sympathetic to human emotion.
Correct. I think we do a bad job of forgetting that we're human, right? And it's I was talking to someone the other day about like what modern warfare looks like, and I was talking about this movie, and every decision that was made during this conflict was made by another human being, right? With the intent to harm another human being. And there's real repercussions to that, emotionally and physically, and I think you see that. And I think sometimes we make movies from our perspective and we say this is how it felt for us, but we never look at how it feels from someone else's perspective. Although we obviously it's horrible no matter how you spin it, but seeing it I think from a Japanese perspective is very different. I thought it was kind of rewarding and something that you don't get to see often.
Yeah, and they don't really shove it down your throat. They really just kind of
Yeah.
display it.
This is
And I-
the best. This is the major reason why this film holds up so well to me. They don't vilify the Japanese. They're not
Yeah.
caricatures like a lot of films did from that era.
Yeah,
There's
look-
no stereotyping. There's no pandering. And the craziest thing about it to me is I wasn't rooting against the Japanese at any point during the film,
Agreed.
but it's like I should have been, but
I
I
know.
wasn't because it's what you just said, Pete. It's just showing them as human. They're just people doing a job.
Right? And they're just people doing a job that someone else that signs their paychecks told them that they had to do. And that's not to be reductive, but it's the way the movie portrays them as human and how those decisions are made, I think is what holds clout for me. Because I think it takes, I don't know if I can say this, but I think it takes balls to do that in a movie.
yeah, no, it does.
Especially for the time.
Yeah. Especially in the 1970s. Come on, man.
And again, not to go back to this, but between the countries that this actual event,
Yeah.
is depicting, and then being able to kind of be so self-aware to be able to tell that story so authentically, yeah, I can't believe that, or it's just so shocking that an audience couldn't really appreciate that, especially during like
Yeah.
the Vietnam War, to see that a way for groups to be able to like move forward and kind of observe the past at the same time. We're at peace. Let's kind of look and see what we've learned from it.
Yeah. It almost gives you hope, which I think that's really all people want.
Yeah,
So,
and Pete, one thing you mentioned was how do we think about like modern warfare or like how it's depicted. And I was just thinking like Call of Duty 1, 2, 3, Black Ops. What else?
Modern Warfare 2, Modern Warfare 3, Zombies, Zombies 2, Zombies 3, Zombies 4.
Yeah,
It's all
so many ways.
it's all
to get
one
Modern
game
Warfare.
at this point.
But it's like if you think about it, right? In the context of how fast information moves, what's the probability any one government in an armed conflict can pull off something even close to this?
The U.S. military, if without any political restrictions, could do it very quickly.
Yeah, agreed. But
Yeah.
that's our strength. That's what we're good at, right?
Oh yeah, yeah.
But in today's world, like there's no sending 14 telegrams, right? It's
No,
hey, a rocket just flew over my house and I live in Germany.
Well, of
You're gonna
course,
be like, where's the rocket
it's,
coming from?
It's tragic and scary, but like the closest thing, right, was 9/11.
Yeah,
right. Yeah,
you're right.
which was a similar intelligence failure. where they
Yeah,
had a
Mhm.
lot of warning signs and
I
didn't
know.
react fast enough.
I'm gonna stay away from touching anything that has
Yeah,
to
we
say.
yeah, we don't have to. I'm surprised we took us this long to mention it.
Yeah,
It is a touchy subject, but
it is.
it's I think like this similarly is or was a very touchy subject. So
Yeah,
probably people who were still alive even after Pearl Harbor at the time probably could have seen this as insensitive.
absolutely. I could definitely see it. What? Let's assume you were Pearl Harbor. What? Mid-20s. By the time this movie came out, you're mid-50s, early 60s, right?
Yeah, maybe younger.
Yeah, maybe younger. I could definitely see how it could be perceived as severely insensitive.
That's why it's so interesting. Like conversely, like I was surprised at how honestly it portrays the American military and the bureaucracy, like we mentioned earlier.
Mhm.
Doesn't portray them in a great light. They were really
Nope.
caught off guard
Mm.
in spite of all the warning signs. It
Yeah,
really
and
shows how the bureaucracy worked against things. And they again, you would expect a film from that era to be much more jingoistic and
yeah,
patriotic and look
and
at
rah
how
rah.
America got fooled by those Japanese. It's like, no, this was. I give a lot of credit to Daryl Zanuck for really sticking through with this and being as
Yeah,
honest and respectful is the right word to both sides.
yeah, I
Yeah, I
agree.
mean, another wartime film, Bridge Over River Kwai, I think also paints those like similar strokes of gray that we see during wartime. And I feel like it's films like that that are able to tell like authentic human experience even during like these times of conflict that are the most honest and kind of why film is so important. And so I think that for me, this is just another reason why this film should be considered more of a classic than it is.
100%.
Yeah, that's astonishing to me that people don't like it. And I understand. Everyone's entitled to their own opinion. And it's a different style. I get it.
Let's talk about the fun stuff now. The
Ooh.
production. Not that that wasn't fun, but
The funner stuff.
Like people almost dying.
yes. We mentioned the budget earlier. It was enormous. You can see where all the money went, and it was spent wisely. I haven't seen every war movie from that era, but this, from what I've seen, this is a cut above anything from that
Mhm.
era.
I think one
One
thing I
of the
wrote down,
best filmed movies I've ever seen.
I agree with that. One of the things I wrote down was the cinematography and the restoration holds up so well, considering that this movie was made in the 70s.
It was technically it was even made in the 60s.
Yeah.
Parts of
And
this were filmed in like 1968. The shots of the Japanese strike force taking off into the rising sun, it's amazing stuff.
yeah,
Some
Yeah.
great shots.
There are really gorgeous shots that actually really did remind me of Lean. Like for example, you see the shots of the planes flying through the sky, but then there's the fishermen at the coast.
Yes.
And I see that as a dichotomy of just like the beauty of the nature around them at the same time during the conflict. Like so well done.
And like at one point, they had like 30 planes flying in formation when they're
Mhm.
flying them into Hawaii. It's like, man, this is like I said, you can really see where the money went.
Mhm.
yeah,
And then the miniature work.
Impressive.
yeah.
Okay, I'm trying not to be biased here. Considering the age of this movie, is this the best use of miniatures ever put to film?
It's really cool,
It,
man.
it looks incredible. Like
Yeah,
Amazing.
it does.
I'm
It does.
not an expert on all of the films that have had miniatures in them, but even just seeing this is just so impressive.
There's
It
a
looked like
ton of effect shots in this film too.
It looks like Michael Bay made a movie in the 1970s.
Oh man,
It's
no, not Michael Bay.
I
This
know,
is
that's
this is
so
a cut
crazy.
above.
this to me is like an example of why like I love like classic Hollywood. It's because they had to work within the confines of the time, and really creative teams would be able to take the special effects of the time, the practical effects of the time, and create magic. This to
Yeah.
me is an example of that, movie magic.
You couldn't NVIDIA your way out of it and just render a new character.
Mm-mm.
Yeah, that's fair.
They
That's
would
very-
only
that's very
have
fair.
when you see a few of those major like stunts, they got one shot because they only have the budget for one shot to do it.
to make this work now.
I mean, I think we mentioned it in the production history. Like they spent months just shooting the miniatures.
That's great.
There's stuff I didn't even realize in the film that are miniatures, like the the Japanese aircraft carriers, like the wide shots. It's all miniatures when they're
So
at
cool.
night.
Didn't know that either.
No,
Didn't know that.
no. I was trying to think of some other great miniature work in films. I have Blade Runner, Starship Troopers, Total Recall, the Lord of the Rings
Starship
trilogy.
Troopers.
Obviously, these are like a lot more modern movies, but like Titanic, The Abyss, True Lies. A lot of the Bond movies have great miniature work. Master and Commander has some great miniature work. But I think if you take into the consideration the age of this film, this is some of the best special effects. I would say even to this day, they hold up really, really well.
Yeah,
Some
agreed.
shots looks a little iffy, but for the most part, it's like, wait, that's not a real battleship? Like,
Yeah,
Yeah.
I wrote that down too. The stunts, everything in that last, I think it was like that last 35 minutes where
oh yeah,
everything just
everything's
pops
blowing
off.
up.
Everything goes nuts. I was like, dude, this is sick for a movie that was made like 50 years ago.
There's a lot
And
of
it
fire,
holds
a
up.
lot of
It holds up.
explosions.
And the one thing is, and today maybe we've breached this, and don't get me wrong, I'm a sucker for a good Marvel movie. I'll absolutely watch it. But if you can make an entire movie on a computer versus having to create that experience for a viewer and an audience using your hands and all of the skills you have at the time without a computer, you have to give them credit.
Mhm.
Because we're 50 years later and still holds up.
Yeah. Yeah, there's just a tactile charm to it. Like, you just know you're watching something real. Sometimes too real, because, Anton, that P-40 crashing, I don't know
Yep.
if you read this in the research. That was an unplanned accident.
Wait, really?
When that P-40 crashes into the other planes and you see
You see it
the
flip.
guys running away for their
Yeah.
lives, they are really running away for their lives. That was not supposed to happen.
And they just decided that we're going to use it.
Yeah.
It happens a lot in
Action
Hollywood.
shot. That's
Yeah.
a modern
That's a
action
real action shot.
shot.
And then when that B-17 bomber is trying to
Yeah.
land with the one wheel, that was used in the final cut. That's real footage of them trying to do it. Nothing faked there.
Oh, I didn't know
Talking
that.
about Marvel, like, this is like a Marvel movie of the day, like the Towering Inferno, Anton. Like, this was
Mhm.
the Avengers of the Titanic. This was as big as a movie got in 1970.
This film had also, I think, not a ton of films like this can always capture this, but I think the scale of the event, and you need that with the miniatures, with proper just usage of all of the extras and like the blocking of the different scenes. You really do feel like kind of the scale and how big this event was.
Yeah, that's a really good call out.
Yeah. I feel like I have such an appreciation for that because we just started. Guilty enough, I've never seen Walking Dead. And this show's been on for like 20 years, I think. And we're
It's okay.
watching.
I haven't really seen it either. It's okay.
You're watching it, but you remember that the show was made so long ago and how creative they were and how they make it feel that the world is actually inhabited by zombies, right? And I think I've developed a real respect for how a TV show makes you feel in that environment. So that's why I think this holds a lot of clout with me because you really do feel the scale of the conflict.
It's brilliant editing because it's a lot of cutting between miniature, matte painting, live action footage, the harbor itself. They're filming real ships, and it's pretty seamlessly cutting between all of that when the attack actually starts. And good use of spatial geography, Anton. It's something we
Yep,
like to talk
absolutely.
about. It's like you always have a good sense of like where the action is taking place, where the characters are in relation to one another. And they set this all up, right? When you see the Japanese planning the attack, they have, like that big model of the harbor. So you have already in your mind's eye, you have a really good layout of like where the ships are, where the
Mhm.
airfield is. Because if you know anything about that island where Pearl Harbor is very small. The island itself is not very big either. So the film just does a really good job of setting all of that up, and then the payoff, the execution of it works really, really well. We mentioned the Jerry Goldsmith score. It's pretty awesome. It's mostly the same two themes, dramatic in all the right moments. Doesn't really feel like an old-timey score either. It comes in at the right
Doesn't.
moments.
It's the one criticism I'll say is the first half of the movie felt a little quiet, which I think is
Oh,
a
yeah.
product of how much dialogue it needs to set it up.
It had to be deliberate. I mentioned
Yeah.
earlier, when the Japanese task force actually starts to sail, that's when the music kicks in.
I think it had to be deliberate.
It felt pretty
Yeah.
deliberate.
Yeah.
It did. And I still enjoyed it. That was my only criticism was, and I like music, but I also understand you can do music with delivery of information.
You definitely can. No, I noticed the same thing. Like right around that hour mark, I'm like, damn, Goldsmith's turning up the heat.
Yeah, it's like, all right, I'm getting ready.
Jerry is cooking right now. Yeah, so Anton, Jerry Goldsmith did the score to Patton too. He just worked, man. He did like a couple scores every year, basically
feel
until
like-
he died.
I feel like
Just
you
a
should
legend.
give the listeners like a follow-up Patton. We should do a Patton episode.
I kind of want to do Patton because one of the ideas I have for the podcast for future seasons is I want to cover the worst films to win Best Picture.
That'd be cool. Like,
Yeah.
So
like
we
even
would
like
talk about Crash.
Oh, we're definitely going to cover Crash.
Oh, Crash was amazing.
Really?
No,
Was it?
It was good.
Was it?
Okay.
Was it
gonna
better
say.
than Brokeback Mountain?
Oh my gosh, the best movie I've ever seen.
Brokeback Mountain probably should have won that year, or Munich.
Probably should have won.
Oh, Munich was spectacular.
Yeah.
I
Well,
like Munich.
you better believe we're covering Munich. No, but Patton would be one that I would cover for worst Best Picture winners because, like, I like the movie. I think it's fine, but it's pretty much the George C. Scott show.
It's very forgettable. It
Yeah.
has some iconic scenes.
I like it.
And
I think it's
yeah,
fine. I'm amazed it won Best Picture over like
yeah,
MASH,
yeah. What?
or this
Right?
wasn't even
MASH.
nominated for Best Picture. Tora is a better movie than Patton. But we would cover that. We would cover Chariots of Fire. We would cover Gandhi.
Never seen Chariots of Fire.
So it's fine. It's just like you look at it, you're like, this beat Raiders of the Lost Ark. Like what?
It's kind of sad.
Yeah. Braveheart is on the list of worst Best Picture winners a lot of the time, and like that angers me. But that also gives me an excuse to cover it on my podcast. So great.
Damn it, Mel Gibson. The man knows story writing.
I know. It's like
It does.
him being an asshole doesn't make that movie bad.
It doesn't. It doesn't. Because I rewatched Braveheart with Ashley, and she was
It's
like,
awesome.
"That was kind
It's
of
a great movie.
Every movie I recommend, I'm like, babe, we need to see it. She's like, is it like Braveheart? I was like, no, it's not like Braveheart. It's just Blade Runner.
It's always funny whenever I tell people, like, you should really watch Apocalypto, and they're like, that was way better than I expected.
It's so good.
So, fun fact. Apocalypto, spectacular movie, bought it on Blu-ray. A friend of mine who will not be named, we eventually wanted to watch Apocalypto one day, and we downloaded this movie legally, of course.
Of course.
And we're watching this movie, and all of a sudden, we're 52 minutes into this movie, and we look at each other and we're like, are there subtitles to this movie?
Oh,
We watched this entire movie, and like I was like, wow. Then years later, I saw it, and I was like, wow, I was an idiot. There was definitely subtitles to this movie, but watching the movie without subtitles was actually a wild experience because you get to see a movie in a completely different way, and it was odd. I enjoyed it. It was different, but that's my fun fact of the day.
I imagine it would be different. Yeah.
Feel free to laugh that I watched the movie for an hour and had no idea that they weren't speaking.
That's how riveting it is.
Yeah, it is.
It's very highly
definitely
entertaining.
Imagine if this film didn't have subtitles.
That'd be a lot harder.
Yeah, that would be
Yeah,
They're
that'd
just
be a
making a
lot
lot of assumptions as it
Yeah.
happens.
Yeah. Apocalypto, you can be like, okay, this guy's running for his life. It's
So
probably
Yamamoto,
bad.
is he for the attack or against it?
Explain to me what's going on here.
Man, what an interesting character. I actually think that was my favorite part of the film, how it depicted how the Japanese Navy was completely opposed to this idea. He even says like the alliance with Germany is a bad idea.
Well,
Yeah.
even I think that there was a lot, there are a lot of examples of reluctant participants. The Japanese ambassador truly, like history shows, truly did want peace, but is being used as a ploy by the Japanese military as a way to kind of like stall. And
From what this movie shows, which I think is mostly accurate, it was really Tojo and Prince Konoye. That's his name.
Mhm.
I couldn't think of it earlier. They are the prime instigators of this, which is, I think historically speaking, it's a little more complicated than that, but they
Yeah.
were certainly two very bellicose type of individuals.
But I think to that earlier perspective, Pat, if you go above them, you make it more about the person and less about the event. Which
Yeah. Oh, I agree.
you can
I
see in the
agree.
movie
Yeah.
deliberately. I understand why they did it, and I understand why they portrayed the people as they did, but there's contributory negligence there.
Yeah. Well, there's that one part where I think it's the Japanese foreign minister. He takes that message from the American ambassador to Tojo. It's the night before the attack. And he's like, there could be a whole new chance at peace. Like negotiations could start afresh. And Tojo thinks about it for a second. And he's just like, nah.
How about no?
Sorry. He's like, all the cards are on the table. Like,
It's not going to work out.
I don't know. I don't know enough about the events to know if that particular scene was historically accurate. Like, did Tojo really have a chance to stop it? I'm not sure about that. If any of our listeners are experts on this, please write in and tell us if you know, because that is it's a pretty fascinating, just little tiny scene in the film.
I mean, it could be historical, true to fact, right?
Yeah. Well, I think it's probably safe to say if the Japanese leadership wanted to stop it, they could have, obviously.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, that's fair. So we have talked about the Vietnam piece, the fact that some people think it's boring, there's no main character, the Japanese side of things, and then we were gushing about the production. Do we have anything to add before we wrap this up?
Ready to jump into it.
All right. Well, Pete, as the guest, you always have the opportunity to go first.
I will this time.
All right.
Because I will defend it. I think every piece of criticism we listed is fair. I do. I honestly think it's all fair. The Vietnam piece, I get it. I think It's boring. I get it. Lack of a main character. I understand it. I think all of the criticism is fair, and I get it. I personally enjoyed the movie, and I think the question is, do I like the movie, and what would I give it as a grade? I think it's a solid B plus. I think it was entertaining. I'm a huge sucker for like National Geographic and history documentaries, so it worked. I do believe the movie could have been shorter, or if you played it on like 1.15 speed, we could have gotten to the same objective where we needed to be with a little less of the dead time and kind of the silence at some points. I thought the dialogue was awesome. I love the historical figures. I'm a sucker for that. I'm going to say solid B plus. Reasonable? Not reasonable? The silence is
Very
I
reasonable.
think very
Very
reasonable.
yeah,
Yeah.
solid B plus.
This film is absolutely a classic, and I feel like it is so underrated. I think there's a lot to appreciate about this kind of film, and we've talked about a lot of it, so I don't want to really rehash it. But one aspect that I think really just goes against this film in the record books is it did not fit the mold for a traditional Academy Award nominee. It did depict like an actual event. Historical biopics are, very much favored by the Academy, but not in this kind of sense where there's a lack of, star power or even like a particular character to kind of mold the movie around, which we talked about actually, I think, and we think really goes in the movie's favor. So deliberate choices like that to actually tell the story that was truly a division of, both studios and directors involved, I think is a very brave decision. And I think shows just how unique and fantastic this movie is and being able to be brave in that sense. Especially also considering that this is a film that's between an American and Japanese studio. Don't want to sound like a broken record, but that's amazing, especially considering the subject matter of the movie and the kind of like self-awareness of the film to be very honest about depicting both sides. I think that is so just fascinating and just amazing to see put to film, and just kind of shows the importance of this medium to be able to tell that story so effectively, so authentically, and just in a way that is really just captivating. And then the way that they build up the tension in the film and really still tell the story effectively and end on a note truly, takes this from being a movie and kind of moves it into art. I think that it's absolutely underrated. I think this is a film that really should go down in the history books much more as a classic and should be celebrated much, much more. This film is an A- in my book.
Wow. It would have been hilarious if you gave it an F. I'm going to
Yeah.
have to go solid D- here.
Yeah, C. Anton, I'm with you. Like this is the definition of underrated. It's a shame that this falls under the radar a bit. It should be better remembered. It's one of my favorite World War II films. All of the criticism that we were stating that it's like boring and has no main character, it's like I hear it, I get it, but these were decisions made by the filmmakers to tell a story, and this movie is proof that it's not completely dead, the era of movie making, but Daryl Zanuck set out to make this movie with the intent that making money wasn't the highest priority. He had a very clear goal for what he wanted to do, and I think he succeeded in that goal. This movie holds up so well for all the reasons that we were discussing, and the creative decisions that they made were deliberate, and it clearly they had to sacrifice some financial stuff in lieu of making those decisions. But the result is every time I see this movie, I like it more. I hadn't seen it in quite some time, and rewatching it for this episode, I just liked it more. It's actually one of my favorite movies. I give it an A.
Damn, I feel like I underrated it now.
I mean, B plus is good.
Yeah, I do.
I can't
think
think of many more World War II movies that are better than this in terms of what it was trying to do and what it achieved.
No,
A Bridge Over River Kwai.
Saving Private
That's
Ryan.
S tier movie.
That is
Saving
like
Private Ryan for sure. Yeah, there's
Yeah.
not many. Like, well, it's not
But-
a movie, but like Band of Brothers, obviously,
Yeah, but Saving Private Ryan, to your point, Saving Private Ryan was trying to tell a different story.
much different story, completely different movie.
Yeah. It's World War II movie, yes. Different subtype of World War II movie.
Yeah.
I think is the asterisk there.
And then when we actually do cover the Michael Bay film Pearl Harbor, all of the reasons why this movie succeeded, I think, is why that movie failed. It did nothing that this movie did. Nothing.
Yeah, it's like they took
Because that
took
film-
this movie and did the inverse.
Other
that
than
film
they
trying to be Oscar
blew
bait.
they
Yeah.
blew stuff up. Congratulations.
Nice, Michael.
Yeah.
And they threw in Cuba Gooding Jr.
That's right.
I forgot Cuba was in the
His
movie.
character is in this film, though, as you
He
know.
is
Dory Miller.
firing
He is
the-
in this
firing
film
the
Yeah.
machine gun. Yep.
with no stupid characterization.
His radio.
Oh,
Right.
did you see the show with him where he's OJ?
No.
American.
Yeah,
Oh, the
it's
American
good.
Crime.
It's pretty
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
It's worth
I
it.
really like that season.
Yeah.
I think I did. I think
It's
I
good.
saw
I didn't
that
see
one.
the second season with Versace, but
Nah, I didn't.
No. Okay. I did
care
see
about
it,
that.
and then I don't think anyone cares about the Versace one. They're like,
No.
we're just closing it out. Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
Yeah, thank you, Pete.
Pete.
A pleasure as always. We're gonna have you
Glad
back
to be
soon.
here. Glad to answer the call whenever called.
The next episode that you're scheduled to appear on is The Village.
Oh, can't wait. All-time best. M. Night Shyamalan. Wait, shout out to he's making movies with his daughter now, which is super cool.
Good for him.
Yeah, I mean,
That's fun.
Yep,
The
I'm
LeBron
retired.
James route.
Yep, I'll never watch another Shyamalan movie.
did you see Knock at the Cabin?
No,
It's
no,
worth a watch, bro.
I will not.
It's worth it,
No,
bro.
the Last Airbender. I was like, that's it. We're done.
No, don't
We
put it
are
on the
done.
Airbender.
I am
Watch-
putting it on because it was a rolling. It started with The Village, where you're like, what's going on here?
Okay.
Then it
okay.
continued with The Lady in the Water, and then The Happening, and then The Last Airbender. I'm like, that's it. I'm out on it.
Okay.
But I did like Signs.
That was before that, though.
I know, but I did like
Yeah.
Signs.
Oh yeah, I like.
Have
Signs.
you
I
seen
do.
Have you seen Knock at the Cabin?
I have.
What do you
I
think?
think it was cheesy.
It's awesome.
All
It's like,
right,
what?
Pete. We are next going to have you on for The Village.
Okay. I'll be back. I'll be back
Yeah.
for it. I can't wait.
And, yeah, that is it for Tora. Anton, we are starting to wind down season 5 already.
I couldn't believe it when I was looking at our schedule.
Yeah.
Time
Only 2
flies when you're having
episodes
fun.
left. Yeah.
Yeah.
Next week's episode is going to be our first Michael Mann film, The Insider.
And that'll have our friend of the show guest, Garrett O'Ringer.
Garrett O'Ringer.
All right, Garrett.
Yeah. And then to close out season 5, we are going to be covering Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone.
Ooh.
There's been a lot of debate. How should we release this episode? The Philosopher's Stone or the Sorcerer's Stone? Because obviously everywhere
Where's your
but the United
citizenship
States,
lie?
it's America.
It's a Sorcerer's Stone.
So, sorcerer parentheses philosopher's stone.
I can't put that on the title card though. That'll look stupid.
Do you have EU subscribers?
Oh yeah,
Oh yeah.
plenty.
Fuck it. Do the philosopher's stone.
I think I might.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think you should. Do it.
Yeah.
Create a
Why
little
not?
chaos,
Yeah,
dude.
sure,
That's how
why
people
not?
look.
Yeah.
People
Yeah,
will
why
know.
not?
Anyway, yes, that is it for this week's edition of Why Wasn't It Better? We will see you next time. Take care. Thanks for listening to Why Wasn't It Better? If you've made it this far, it's safe to assume that you like what you hear. If you have not already done so, please hit that subscribe button and become a follower wherever you listen to your podcasts. We're on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. If you really like what you hear, you can contribute to our podcast monetarily and sign up for our Patreon. So whether you're commuting, chilling at home, or embarking on a nostalgia-fueled movie adventure, make Why Wasn't It Better your go-to podcast companion.